Would you think I'm crazy if I told you that the best cure for loneliness is being alone? Well, it is. And I'm going to tell you why. First of all, I want to ask you a question. Do you believe that Jesus was the greatest teacher that ever lived? Let me go a little further than that. Do you believe that Jesus was the smartest man that ever walked on the face of the earth? I do. I believe that because he knew everything. He made us. He is our creator. And so when we think about what Christ tried to impart to us to be successful, the spiritual tools that he gave his disciples, we know for a fact worked, because they went from city to city sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. And they knew that if their life did not line up to what they were saying, that people were probably not going to listen to them very long. But their life did line up to what they were saying. So evidently, whatever Christ modeled and taught his disciples worked. These were not men and women who were extraordinary people. They were ordinary people, just like you and I. And so if they could learn, if an old fisherman could learn how to live the life that Christ wanted us to live and really be self-controlled and self-disciplined and be able to show forth love and to minister in service and by giving of oneself and one's goods and what have you, if they could learn that from listening to Jesus and from doing what Jesus showed them to do, then truly we can learn the same thing, and we can become that person as well. So solitude. Let's talk about solitude today. I want to encourage you to get into some readings regarding solitude. It is an extremely beneficial spiritual practice. Remember, John Wesley called these spiritual disciplines means of grace. Now, you can't do something legalistically and expect grace to be a part of it. So that means that when we do these spiritual disciplines, we have to do them with the right motive. And that motive has to be to be with Jesus, to be what Jesus wants us to be, to reflect who he is. And so if our heart is to become what Christ wants us to become, the spiritual disciplines are a means in which God can enable us to do that. Grace is the ability to do what we cannot do on our own. So if we give God a chance by working in partnership with him, then we can see the benefit that comes from that. In Richard Foster's book, Celebration of Discipline, which is a great book, he talks about solitude, and he talks about how that Christ modeled this so many times and how important it was to Jesus to get alone. I want to read you an excerpt out of this. It says, "Inward solitude has outward manifestations. There is the freedom to be alone, not in order to be away from people, but in order to hear the divine whisper better. Jesus lived in an inward heart solitude. He also frequently experienced outward solitude. He inaugurated his ministry by spending 40 days alone in the desert in Matthew 4, 1 through 11. Before he chose the 12, he spent the entire night alone in the desert hills. When he received the news of John the Baptist's death, he withdrew from there in a boat to a lonely place apart. After the miraculous feeding of the 5,000, Jesus went up into the hills by himself in Matthew 14:23. Following a long night of work, in the morning, a great while before day, he rose and went to a lonely place in Mark 1:35. When the 12 returned from a preaching and healing mission, Jesus instructed them to come away by yourselves to a lonely place in Mark 6:31. Following the healing of a leper, Jesus withdrew to the wilderness and prayed. in Luke 5:16. With 3 disciples, he sought out the silence of a lonely mountain as the stage for the transfiguration in Matthew chapter 17. As he prepared for his highest and most holy work, the work of the cross, Jesus sought the solitude of the Garden of Gethsemane in Matthew 26:36 through 46. He says, I can go on, but perhaps this is sufficient to show that seeking out of solitary places was a regular practice for Jesus, and so it should be for us. So getting alone with God has such awesome benefit. I started this video by saying that if you're a lonely person, the greatest thing you can do is to spend time in solitude, but you have to do it right. You can't go into your dark room and sit there and think to yourself how you're neglected and that no one loves you and that there's no one out there that you can connect with. You may have a void of human connection right now, but I have got such great news for you, because if you are a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ, and I hope you are, then you can walk into any place of solitude with comfort, knowing that Jesus Christ is right there with you. As a matter of fact, spending time in solitude makes the presence of Jesus so evident that you cannot even begin to miss it. Now let's talk about going into solitude for a minute. Solitude takes time, okay? It takes time, because I'm sitting out here on my deck right now, and no one else is around except my dog. And but yet at the same time, I'm not really seriously in solitude at this moment, because I have just recently been with people. And so really, in order to be in solitude, you have to go to some place where you're alone, where you can kind of rest in the Lord. There's a great principle that goes along with solitude, and that is keeping the Sabbath. Dallas Willard talks about that in his book, Divine Conspiracy. Let me read just an excerpt out of this real quickly. He said, in regarding solitude, the idea of doing nothing proves to be absolutely terrifying to most people I speak with. But at least the person who is capable of doing nothing might be capable of refraining from doing the wrong thing. So you develop discipline. When you learn how to do nothing, you're actually learning something. Because how many of you know that it seems like we live in a culture right now when everybody has to be doing something. And if you're standing in line at the grocery store, you've got to have your phone out and looking at it. Or if there's not a waking moment that we can choose not to do anything. It's like we feel like we have to be doing something all the time. But Dallas said that doing nothing is learning how to do nothing is great, because it might keep you from doing the wrong thing. And then perhaps he or she would be able to do the right thing. And doing nothing has many other advantages. It may be a great blessing to others around us who often hardly have a chance while we are in action. And possibly the gentle Father in the heavens could draw nigh if we would just be quiet and just rest a bit. Generally speaking, he will not compete for our attention, and as long as we are in charge, he is liable to keep a certain distance. Every person should have regular periods in their life when he or she has nothing to do. Periods of solitude and silence are excellent practices for helping us to learn how to do that. The law that God has given for our benefit, as well as His, tells us that 1/7 of our time should be devoted to doing nothing. No work, not by ourselves or any of our family, employees, or animals. That includes, of course, religious work. It's called the Sabbath. And so when we get alone with God, we choose to go in solitude. We have to give ourselves, I have found that going into solitude requires a couple of hours minimum. Because, if I leave civilization, we'll call it, whether it be my home or my family or whatever, and I go out and I find myself a place to be. You know, it takes a while for our mind to actually settle down and to quiet itself and to learn how to rest and really to just be at peace with everything that's going on around us. Nature is a great way of doing that. So if you're able to get outside, whether it's in the woods or at the beach or whatever, you know, I love the beach, but there's always people at the beach. But you know, being in solitude allows us to really let our minds begin to rest, and we begin to seriously not only get to know God, but we begin to get to know ourselves, because there are things about ourselves that we tend to push back in the shadows that we don't really notice or even give thought to until we get totally alone with ourselves, to where we can be laid bare and honest. You know, when we're alone with our thoughts, then we're able to see where our thoughts go, and we're able to see what our true desires and ambitions are. I feel like that it really helps me to recognize what my values are, what's most important to me, and how unimportant so many things are that we allow into our life. Solitude requires us to get alone. It requires time, and really it requires quiet, to be able to just be quiet. The discipline of silence, which we'll talk a little bit about in the next video, goes so along with solitude. You know, Jesus said, as I mentioned in one of the other videos on the Sermon on the Mount, that when we shut ourselves up in secret with God, that He will reward us openly. But one of the greatest benefits of solitude is that it teaches us how to practice the presence of God. And when I say practice the presence of God, what I mean is that as we go back into our jobs and our homes and our families and whatever it might be, that we're so much more aware that Christ is right here, that He's shoulder to shoulder with us, working with us, yoked with us at all times. Loneliness, it will quickly flee when you recognize the fact that the presence of the Lord is as close as just a quiet place. All you have to do is get alone. Because you know what? You can be lonely in a large group of people, but you can't be lonely if you're spending time with Jesus, because He's right there. And not only that, but you begin to learn to hear the voice of God. You can recognize when the Lord is speaking to you. And so there's an opening there. There's a door that opens up in solitude that you can't find anywhere else. And so I encourage you to begin to practice this discipline of solitude. Whatever it takes. You say, well, I live in the city. I can't really get in the country. Hey, you can do it anywhere. You can do it in your room, at your house. If you turn everything off, if everybody's gone, you can do it sitting in your vehicle. You can do it sitting in your backyard, on your deck, whatever it might be. But you have to give yourself the time and really get yourself in the right mindset. When I go into solitude, I like to bring my Bible with me. I do pray when I'm in solitude, because the Lord begins to show me things that I need to pray about. And He will speak to you in that way. I also have some passages that are on my phone that I have a long list of passages that I can just bring up and begin to read certain passages like Psalms 1, Psalms 23, 1 Corinthians 13, Romans chapter 8, various passages that really connect me with God, and just meditate on them. You know, in solitude, you can do practically every one of the disciplines in regards to worship and prayer and fasting and meditation and memorization. And all of that fits so well with solitude, because you're giving yourself that time to do it. And so I hope that you do that. And so this is Straightforward Therapeutics. Be sure and like and share and follow and, subscribe and get some people on board with us. And I will be praying that your time in solitude will be super rich. God bless you. Bye-bye.